All right, here we go. Explaining why everyone in Lost was dead the entire time. So I have 11 points, and I'm gonna go into great detail, and I'm gonna go in depth on each one of these in just a sec. But right off the bat, we have number one is the smoke monster. Number two, we have the immortal people that exist on the island. Number three, we have the bizarre sickness. And number four, I've written in green because it's a fairly solid piece of evidence. And number five, there's this magical teleporting haunted cabin. And then number six, there's the mirror thing that's at the top of the lighthouse towards the end of the series. And number seven, there's like the dynamite that chooses to kill Arst, but then when Richard and Jack try to die from the dynamite, like they're invincible and it's just unfair. And then number eight, there's the part where like the universe just refuses to allow Michael to commit suicide, and that's because he wasn't ready to move on yet. And number nine, there were only like some special individuals that were warped out of the Ajira flight crash that also time traveled. This number nine one is just such a silly, dumb, cheap thing that like the show did. I'm gonna explain very carefully why I think it's unfair and why I think it was lazy writing that the show did it the way they did it. And number 10 I've written in red because it's by far the most frustrating. Well, it's frustrating, and it's not even that this is confusing. It's just so cheap and so silly, and it's probably one of like the dumbest thing and one of the most cheesiest things that the show does. It is the nuke at the end of the season 5 finale, and it's like this mix of like a bomb and a time travel device. I'm going to show a bunch of evidence for it, and then of course this will lead into the final and probably the most complicated and strongest point of all of them, the church that's in Los Angeles, the City of Angels. I'm going to go into great detail on everything in here. So jumping in right off the bat with number one, we have this smoke monster guy, and this is a pretty big reason. And he seems to follow this spiritual afterlife-like pattern. So this is the Man in Black, and he is also the smoke monster. These two are the same. The early on we see this instance of Boone and Shannon. The smoke monster tricks Boone into seeing Shannon dying, but this isn't actually the real Shannon. This is just some kind of illusion. And it's very odd. It's kind of hard to explain why this happened or why someone would do this. But the better example, and one of the best examples, is what we see here in this scene with Echo. So in this scene, Echo and the Man in Black are on this like religion quest almost, and the Man in Black takes the form of Yemi, who is the brother of Echo, and Yemi, was a priest. And basically what's happening here is Echo is guilty, Echo is feeling guilty from his dark past of killing individuals, but really truthfully he was only killing people for the goodness of himself and his loved ones, and really he had to protect himself and his loved ones. And he comes clean about it. He says, I have not sinned, and he very proudly states it, and he moves on with himself and says that it's okay that what he did, and he refuses to admit that he's a bad person. And because of this, because he refuses to admit that he's sinned, the Man in Black, I think, does him a favor by, turning into smoke, and he comes back and he kills Echo. The smoke monster kills Echo, but I think that was a gift, though, because when the smoke monster kills Echo, it's symbolizing that he's ready to move on and ascend from the island, which the island is hell, and basically he's allowing Echo to move on by killing him on the island. And so I think Echo is being gifted here by being killed by the smoke monster. But perhaps the most interesting piece of evidence we see from the smoke monster is when Benjamin Linus goes in front of the smoke monster to be judged deliberately. And the smoke monster does this like magical thing of showing Benjamin Linus his past and basically how Benjamin Linus is such a horrible, horrible, evil person who essentially got his own. There's his daughter. He basically got his own daughter killed. It's not his blood daughter, but still. And here, is the scene where he's allowing his daughter to be executed. And the smoke monster does this very interesting thing where it doesn't kill him. Um, and you think in this scene like, oh, of course the smoke monster is going to kill him. Benjamin Linus is such a terrible person, but the smoke monster doesn't kill him. I believe is because he's forcing Benjamin Linus to stay on the island by not killing him, which is hell. So basically, the smoke monster retreats and allows Benjamin Linus to live, but this is actually a punishment because now he's forced to stay in hell, which is the island. So as you could see from earlier, those were three pieces of evidence that the smoke monster follows this odd religious sort of quest-like pattern. And this scene here, like, what's the deal? So he touches this magical light at the end of some magical cave, and now all of a sudden he has superpowers to like turn into the smoke monster, and he's immortal, and Jacob's immortal. And speaking of Jacob, we have the three immortal dudes who exist on the island. Jacob is one of the three. Then we have the Man in Black, of course. And then Richard as well is also a very interesting character who doesn't age. And what I mean by immortal is that they don't age. Technically they are killable in some way. However, they do not age. Richard acts as this advisor for like the island, for the others. I'm not going to go too in depth. Overall, I think he's a pretty good character. And I'm not dissing the show or anything and saying that, oh, because this is unrealistic, it's impossible. I think a show's allowed to do this and claim it's real life. However, I think The Man in Black follows quite a religious afterlife-like pattern. They do everything so vague, and it does give off these vibes that they're in hell. Um, and overall, like the show tends to fail in this area where they make the story world believable. They just don't do a good job of making the story world believable in a lot of other areas. And so of course I'm going to include the fact that, they crash on an island and there are immortal beings that exist on the island. And for that, I think that is a minor piece of evidence that it is hell. So that was reason number 2, and now we're moving on to reason number 3, the sickness along with its inconsistencies. So this guy here in the first photo, this is Danielle Rousseau's husband, and he gets the sickness, and he tries to murder his pregnant wife. Thankfully, he fails, and, Danielle ends up shooting him. But that's the first example of the sickness, and then Claire gets it later on, or she just went insane. At some point, Claire wanted to kill Kate, and Claire was just acting very much not like herself. And I think this show implies that she got the sickness, but I don't actually know if she did or didn't, but I'm pretty sure she did. And then incredibly at the end, we have Saeed, who is drowned in the pond, and Jack pronounces Saeed dead. But then like an hour later, he wakes up from being dead, and he has the sickness, and Dogen explains that this sickness means that like he's been claimed. Claimed is like the closest word, and basically kind of sounds like he's like a zombie or some crap. The simple explanation, of course, is that the sickness represents the soul ascending upwards into heaven, but the soul leaves the body, and the part of the sickness though is that their body stays, their body lingers on the island, their body remains in hell even though they have no soul. The soul has moved on, however their soulless bodies remain within this hell-like realm that is the island. And the inconsistencies here are the show like sporadically does it, and they never like really go into detail like how you get it, or the show seemingly just slaps it in and out of the storyline as it's convenient to them. But I think my explanation is perhaps the most the realistic explanation, because the show pretty much fails to provide one. So moving on to number 4, we have the pregnancy slash fertility issues that exist on the island. So if someone is impregnated on the island, then that individual will die during pregnancy along with the baby. But if someone is impregnated off of the island and then they arrive to the island, they'll be fine. So that was the case with Claire and Danielle Rousseau. So these individuals here that I'm pointing at, they were pregnant by the time they got to the island, and because of that, they were fine. And Sun was impregnated on the island, though, and they said that Sun was going to die because she was impregnated on the island. And the reason, the logic behind this that the show did, which was a cheap reason and I think bogus, but their explanation was that there were high levels of electromagnetism, and that made it very special that, like, if you were impregnated on the island and you stayed on the island, then you would die. But if, the electromagnetism levels are that high, surely that it would have some other effects, some other negative effects towards pregnant women. And not to mention that while these females have this downside from the electromagnetism, why is the male sperm count, right? So Ethan, Jen, the males, and with males, their sperm count is significantly multiplied because of the same thing. And why would that happen? Why would that exist just because of high electromagnetism levels? That makes no sense. It makes no sense. And with Sun especially, we have a very rare special instance because Sun was impregnated off of the island, but then she was able to escape the island in time, and so because she escaped the island, she was able to live and have her baby as normal. Now, I don't think that this means that they were alive, though. I think this is simply the fact that in this universe, the afterlife does not allow you to reproduce in hell. However, if you escape the island, right, if you escape the island, the rest of the world now is purgatory. So the world is purgatory, the island is hell, and the church in Los Angeles is heaven. And I'm going to, talk more on that much later on. But basically, that sums it up. The pregnancy thing on the island, it pretty much just means you can't reproduce in hell. And also, I wanted to include some more pictures of Danielle Rousseau because she's obviously the most underrated character in the entire show, and I absolutely love her bolt action rifle. Very reliable. So I just wanted to quickly clarify that with Sun, when you get pregnant on the island, it's okay as long as you leave the island. So, and leaving the island, the rest of the world represents purgatory, and the plane is also purgatory. And in this universe, so reproduction is possible in, purgatory. It's just not possible in the hell dimension, which is the island over here. So I just want to briefly touch up on the haunted cabin and more importantly, the teleporting cabin, right? So this is just a crappy wooden structure that somehow can magically teleport. And there's a few times in the series where it teleports. And the show, like I would believe something like this and I would accept it as like real life, magic can exist within fantasy shows, but the show just doesn't bother to explain it. The show just doesn't even care to give any reasoning behind it. They don't go in depth at all on it. They just, slap it in here as part of one of the island's magical things. And the place is just clearly haunted. In this scene towards the end, I don't even know. I mean, I don't think it was Jacob. They went to like see Jacob, but wasn't it like the man in black that was invisible or whatever it was? Like the place just starts violently shaking at like the end of this scene. It's just haunted. Everything about this cabin is just haunted. It has afterlife written all over it. But giving credit due where credit's due, though, at least with the haunted cabin, they at least showed, the lore behind it being built, and they went in depth on that. And it was some Dharma Initiative crew member who started the floor plans and whatnot, and they explained that, and so that was nice. But with number 6, though, the Harry Potter like magical mirror at the top of this lighthouse, they show just lazily doesn't include any lore about this, and they leave us completely in the dark. They don't even bother to explain anything. So we have no idea how the heck this thing was built or who put this thing and when it was built, right? And then especially even more mysterious though is this magical, mysterious mirror dialing device. So all of their names, all of the main characters' names are scribbled down on this like dial thing. And when they dial in on Jack Shephard's name, it somehow magically shows him the house that Jack Shepherd grew up in, and so Jacob was watching them, and Jack says, that he hadn't lived there since he was a kid, and that goes to show like this magical God, the magical God that Jacob is. He like was watching them ever since they were kids. And Jacob at this time is already dead, by the time this scene is going. And so, they kind of get away. Jacob doesn't have to explain much because he's already dead and they've got bigger fish to fry. So the show just kind of like escapes out of it in a cheap way and they don't really have to go in depth. And then Jack gets so mad about it, he ends up smashing it because he's like freaking out and he wants to know why Jacob was watching them. And rightfully so. I mean, I'm kind of with Jack. I'd be pretty pissed off too and I'd be pretty confused. And so, this mirror, it's just pure magic, right? And it's just part of the island. It's just part of the show. And they don't really explain how or why it's possible at the end of the season. It just seems like they just do all this magical stuff and provide no explanation. So with number 7, I wanted to go back to the videos because I wanted to show the differences between this scene with Arzt, who is an extremely insignificant character, and then I'm going to go compare it to a much later scene with the dynamite between Jack and Richard Alpert. But basically, I'm just going to go into the main point right now, though. But the main point is that the important characters are like invincible and are immortal, and they just can't die because they're not ready to move on. However, the island, or hell rather, treats these insignificant individuals who like don't really have a purpose yet. They just treat them like crap, and they just easily are removed from the island by dying very easily. So this is being played in slow motion. I'm gonna hit play and just notice like how he barely does anything, right? That he just moves the dynamite stick a little bit and it like touches the leaf or something and it just decides to like blow up. And here, we'll just play it. Boom. That's all he did. He just moved the stick of dynamite just like a little bit too fast and it blows up. And some people might say like, oh yeah, well he moved it too fast. But later on in this episode though, they like stuff it in their backpacks and they're hiking through the woods and I think like one of them trips or some crap and then the smoke monster comes and they have to like drop it on the ground and start running and it's just unbelievable that he died in that one little motion and then the rest of the characters are like never affected by it. Nothing like that ever happens to them. And I think means that they're in the afterlife, and the ones that deserve to be in hell, they still have work to do. Whereas Arzt, the island or the hell, was a little bit nice to him, and they just decided like, you know what, you're done. You get to go ascend onto heaven now. And we are going to jump into the next clip with Richard Alpert and Jack. Richard was deliberately trying to kill himself here with the dynamite, right? And the fuse is going, and because Jack is really important, and because Richard's really important, Jack already knows that the dynamite's not going to go off, and he's correct here. And he closes his eyes. This is one of my favorite scenes. But basically, the dynamite just refuses to kill them because they're too important, and there it goes. The fuse doesn't go off. Because Jack and Richard still have work to do in hell. They're not ready to move on yet. And there's this magical, mystical force that prevents the dynamite from going off, and they are invincible. They are invincible because they are simply not ready yet to move on from hell. And there really just isn't much explanation. So if you've lost track by now, don't worry about it because I kind of have too. Anyways, that was number 7, and now we're on number 8. So number 8 is one of my strongest pieces of evidence for why I believe that the entire series was them in the afterlife. The whole series was them being in the afterlife. So here, one of the most iconic and also one of the most stressful and traumatizing scenes in the series is when Walt is kidnapped away from Michael, and he's screaming out his name. Thankfully, later, they do escape the island and they escape hell. But basically, the main point of this reason why the entire show was in the afterlife is this scene right here. So Michael gets off of the island, and then Walt goes like live with the grandma or something, and Michael just can't live with himself, and he tries to commit suicide. And he actually tries it twice. So he tried the first time in a car, and he wouldn't die. And then he tries with this revolver. He loads the revolver, right? And for those of you that don't know, a revolver is actually one of the most reliable types of handguns. A revolver is more reliable than a typical semi-auto mag-fed pistol. But anyways, he pulls the trigger and nothing happens. And then he does it again, and he checks that it's loaded, and he keeps trying to pull the trigger, but the gun keeps jamming, and it's impossible for Michael to kill himself. And keep in mind that the magical island powers no longer are at play here, because guess what? He's presumably thousands of miles away from the island. He's off of the island, and he's in, I forget what city he's in, but he's like in America, and he just cannot die. And and this guy Tom here, he and Michael visit each other. They see each other outside of the island. They're completely off the island. And Tom tells Michael, he's like, "Oh, did the bullet bounce off your skull, or did the gun jam?" And so Tom knew that Michael was invincible. And Tom's explanation was that the island's not done with you yet, or some magical crap. But I mean, come on. That we all know that can't be the case. This is clearly when Michael left hell, when Michael left the island, he was still in purgatory, and he wasn't ready yet to move on. He couldn't die because he wasn't ready to move on yet, and the universe is preventing him from dying. And by the way, the same thing happens again. And those of you that are still skeptical, the same thing happened with Martin Keamy. I don't know if you guys remember Martin Keamy, but Martin Keamy was the lead mercenary guy, and I don't have a picture of him. I should have done that. But Martin Keamy goes to kill Michael because they were suspicious of Michael of planting the bomb in the freighter or some random crap like that. And Martin Keamy, he loads his handgun and he points it at Michael and he tries to kill him. And his handgun was clearly loaded. He loads it properly. He pulls the trigger and it just jams. And the handguns, numerous times, they just jam when they're pointed at Michael because he's just invincible. And I want to throw in one final thing here, one final little quirk that I have. So Walt here Walt has some very magical, mystical things going on. So when Walt was kidnapped on the raft that same night, I believe this was the same night in the series, he somehow magically ghost appears in front of Shannon, and Shannon freaks out that she sees Walt because she knew that Walt left on the raft. And so, but Walt couldn't have been on the island with them. Walt couldn't have been in front of Shannon because Walt was snatched and kidnapped. So Walt was in the custody of the others, but he magically appears. And it isn't just Shannon having a vision, because later towards the end, Walt makes a second appearance, a second ghostly appearance, and Shannon freaks out in the rain, and Sayid is with her, and she's like, "Do you see Walt?" And Sayid admits it. Sayid is like, "Yes, I saw him." And so multiple people saw Walt, just impossibly. And this could, I'm gonna rant on, continue to ramble on just a little bit longer. I know this is a really long point, but it is possible that this was the Man in Black that was disguising himself as Walt. But that would be kind of unusual, because typically the Man in Black can only take on the form of people that have died. So for instance, Yemi was dead, and so he was able to take on the form of Yemi. And oh God, who was the other person? And John Locke, of course, right? So John Locke is dead, and he takes on, the Man in Black takes on the form of John Locke. But Walt isn't dead. And so I believe that that's a reason why Walt could potentially be not even part of the afterlife. I don't think Walt is actually real here. When Walt is on the island, I don't think Walt is actually with them. I think this is just like an illusion. It's just kind of like this angel or this ghost illusion that Michael is forced to like take care of, but I don't think the actual Walt is actually dead. I think it's just the other characters that are dead. So for number 9, I'm just going to let the Ajira flight crash kind of play out in the background while I talk. But so basically Kate, Hurley, Jack, Sayid, and Sun are on this flight, and they're important because they are part of the Oceanic Six, and they were once on the island, and they're very important characters. But as the plane is like crashing, this like magical time travel effect happens, but it only happens to Jack, Kate, Sayid, and Hurley. It does not happen to Sun, and they never explain why. It's like this bizarre thing, and the time travel effect is happening right now. But but like, but like, why? Like the show does this so randomly, and they just do it so lazily, and they never even attempt to give a single explanation, and they just do it for the convenience of the plot. And but truthfully, I mean, it kind of benefits me because it helps to add to just the mysteriousness that that shows that this is the afterlife. I just strongly want to clarify something really quickly, though, and yes, I'm bringing out Microsoft Paint. I am not dissing the fact that the show is using time travel, and therefore, just because there's time travel, the show is too unrealistic, and then because of that, they're in the afterlife. The point I'm trying to make is the show does this cheap thing where, clearly, Kate, Sayid, and Jack and Hurley were teleported to the mainland, and Sun should have been a part of that. Like the show could have done this thing like, oh, because they were the Oceanic Six, and oh, because they were all coming from the island, they all time traveled back to the island together. And you know, and it's not even that the fact that they time traveled, they're teleported to the main island, right? And they're also time traveled. Like it does this like teleportation and time travel at like the same time, which it just feels like such a cheap thing. They just do it just for the convenience of the plot, and they hardly ever go into detail explaining why. And then, of course, Sun is for whatever reason just not a part of it, and she ends up on Hydra Island. And not only does she end up on Hydra Island, but she also ends up being in the wrong year. So it's like not only does she not teleport with them, but she doesn't get to time travel either, and it's just also confusing. And sorry, I got a little fed up towards the end of that last one, but as you can see, now we're on the red, and so apologies in advance, but this isn't going to get any better because it only gets more frustrating and more confusing. And honestly, like the show at this point has just lost all credibility of just resembling just anything aside from just pure fantasy, as if like a 8-year-old wrote the bloody thing. But so here Jack insists, right, that the nuke, when they detonate at the bottom of the hatch, they'll create, you know, the alternate universe where you know, Oceanic 815 flight doesn't crash on the island. And you know, and the show even shows it too. They like, it's even showed as, hey, they did the alternate universe, but then at the very end there's like that bull crappy twist. But anyway, there are individuals who will claim that they weren't actually affected by the bomb blast, or the nuke actually didn't go off, and that they just time traveled. However, there are 3 key pieces of evidence that the characters were affected by the bomb blast from this nuclear device. So the first reason of which is in like the next scene, after the bomb, after she detonates the nuke in season 6. So Kate, we see Kate like wake up in like a tree or some crap, and her ears are ringing, and there's like this intense ringing, and it's not like the normal time travel ear ringing, because in normal time travel there's like a little bit of the ringing, but it doesn't stay for long. It's not that strong. But with Kate though, and with the characters though, the ringing is like really strong, and it stays present throughout like the entire scene. It's like their hearing is like, it's implied that their hearing is like really impaired, presumably from the bomb blast that they were affected by. And 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 the second piece of evidence is that they're all spread out from one another, as if, because the blast like threw them like almost 100 feet apart from each other, and Kate has to like run over to like find everyone, and like Miles and Sawyer, everyone is just spread out, and that doesn't normally happen. Like when they normally time travel, like they aren't like thrown apart from each other like that. And then the third and final piece of evidence that they were affected by the bomb blast is when Kate does finally reach Jack. Jack is on the ground, and it takes him really long to like recover and to get up. And yeah, and when they first time traveled, like when Sawyer first time traveled and when John Locke first time traveled at like the beginning of season 5 or whatever, yeah, they did get thrown on the ground, but that was only just for a second though. But Jack here is very clearly like wounded, and he needs to like recover. It takes Jack a few moments to like get back on his feet from the bomb blast, that and because um yeah, those are the three pieces of evidence that they were affected by the bomb blast. And and it's not like they just miraculously survived a nuke. It's like, okay, show, you know what, fine, these people are magical, they survive a bomb blast. But then the fact that they survived the bomb blast and they also time travel, it's just so silly that the show just does this like double thing. It's just a bomb that like wounds them, and it also time travels them. It's just the dumbest, stupidest thing that I think the show did. Um, and by the way of which, speaking of which, Juliet, like I want to know how Juliet died, like because I presume that Juliet was injured from the same bomb blast, right? But she also died, and I'm wondering, like, did she die from the fall? Because remember, when Juliet detonated the nuke, she fell down the hatch, and I can't remember. It was probably like 50 feet or like maybe more, and she's clearly like wounded. And so I wonder, after Juliet detonates this nuke, and Sawyer and Juliet, they have like their final moments together. But what is it that finishes Juliet off? Was it the fall that finished her off? Was it the fall that ended up killing her, or was it that the nuclear blast killed her, or she was wounded from the nuclear blast that happened like right in front of her face? Like it's just stupid, you guys. It's just stupid. And then of course it like the show eggs us on to believe that it worked in some capacity, because here we see a different version of Jack on the 815 flight, and it doesn't crash. And it's a completely alternate universe, because the island is like 100 feet underwater, and it's not there. And like Desmond is also there on the plane, and Kate's there on the plane. Like they're all somehow magically together, and the plane doesn't crash. Now, this is the reality, of course, where they're dead, because of course when they land in Los Angeles, they all like have a party at a concert, and they go to some magical church, and that's when they all learn that, hey, we're all dead. And it's like, wait, but Kate, I don't remember you dying. It's like, oh yeah, well, everyone dies sometime. And so it's just here. It's almost like this scene here, this scene where flight at 815 doesn't crash. It's almost like this is just a permanent thing, and within the time, within the timeline, and this could have been shown at like the very beginning of like season 1, and it still would have made sense. It's almost like this is just some magical thing. And by the way of which, right? So when the 815 flight does land in Los Angeles, it's not like it's just like that afternoon and then they go to the church, right? No, they spend, I believe it's like almost an entire week's worth of time. Like Jack resumes working at a hospital, and doesn't Sawyer have like this cop career or something in the alternate universe? And like they spend like a few days, and Jack tries to convince John Locke to do the experimental surgery to fix his back, because remember, John Locke cannot walk. John Locke is in a wheelchair. And John Locke refuses. He's like, no, I'm fine in the wheelchair, really. And then he like goes to bed and like he sleeps on it, and like they spend time in the universe, in the world, like they're part of like a regular society in Los Angeles. But apparently they're dead. And what I'm so frustrated about is if the writers claim that, you know, this week that they spend in Los Angeles, and and it even shows like, you know, Benjamin Linus is like a teacher at Alex's school, and like if they're saying that all of that is, you know, them being dead and that's the afterlife, then who's to say that it wasn't all the afterlife? Because, you know, if anything, them landing in Los Angeles, this timeline makes more sense than the rest of the show. Um, and that's going to bring us into our final point, the church. But I just can't emphasize enough on just how much this just doesn't make sense. And the writers just do this dumb thing where they like trick us into believing that this is an alternate universe, which by any standard of, you know, the media, of any media source doing like a time travel bit, this is the alternate universe. And then that this idea of the nuclear bomb destroying the island so they never crashed, this is the alternate universe. And it's just silly that the writers just had to be different and had to do something that just clearly is impossible and doesn't make any sense. And there's more stuff with the writer's afterlife that doesn't make sense, and there's something with the church that doesn't make sense that I'm also going to touch on right now. So I decided to do this last bit also in Microsoft Paint, and I'm starting to wonder why I didn't just do the whole damn thing in Microsoft Paint to begin with. But anyway, I do just want to thank everyone for making it this far into the video, and of course I wanted to clarify that all of this, because you've made it this far into the video, I'm going to clarify that all of this is of course just my personal opinion, and of course everyone's allowed to have their own different opinion, and of course even the writers said something like, you know, that what I'm saying isn't true, and of course the writers confirmed something that of course it was real life, but I'm just expressing my opinion. I'm just, the point of this video was to basically just show that the writers just hinted too much, and the writers just leave too much evidence, and they just leave too much proof that it is all the afterlife as opposed to real life. And I just want to jump in and actually clarify again, because earlier I think some of you probably thought I misspoke, but I actually was not kidding when I said that that they were dead like for the entirety of the show. So I think even before they got on the plane, I think before they even boarded Oceanic 815, I think that was still part of their afterlife. Like they had already died. And so when this plane crashed on the island, there are people that believe that when the plane crashed in hell, that was when they all originally died. I am not even saying that. I'm actually saying that they were dead before that. Before they even crashed on the island, they were dead. And to you know, go in depth on this theory is basically the rest of the world here, the rest of the world is purgatory for them. They are in a purgatory state. They have all died, and I'm going to do another separate video explaining how I think each of the characters died, because they all have quite unique backstories. And so the rest of the world is purgatory, and the plane is also purgatory. And when the plane crashes on the island, of course, that is their hell. And, you know, obviously when they're on the island, they do all that, you know, crap, and they have to prove themselves, and they go through all those challenges, and, you know, they all have their own spiritual paths and journeys to follow, and their own set of challenges to overcome. Something else that happens, though, of course, is when we see that after that nuclear explosion goes off, after the nuke is detonated at the bottom of the hatch, we do see the Oceanic 815 flight land in the City of Angels. And going back on earlier, you know, they do spend a lot of time here in this city. They spend I'm fairly certain it's at least, I said like, oh, maybe it was like a few days, but I'm fairly certain it was at least a full week, like a full like 5 or 6 days maybe of where they're in the city. And Jack, when Jack landed here in Los Angeles, the coffin of that was supposed to have his father in it is like suddenly missing. And so it takes him time to reconnect with the coffin to find it. And there's all this drama going on with all the characters, and Charlie and like Desmond are like hanging out, and they've got like some band to go to, or there's like the concert. And one by one they slowly start remembering what happened on the island. um just this very like confusing place. And I know I mentioned earlier that Benjamin Linus was a teacher at school, and John Locke, was a substitute teacher at that same school, or maybe he like got a job as like a regular teacher, because remember, John Locke was a teacher at the same school with Benjamin Linus. And Alex was one of the students, and Benjamin Linus one night even went out to dinner with Danielle Rousseau. And so Danielle Rousseau and Alex and Benjamin Linus were all at the dinner table at their home. And there's just so much life happened here. There was just so much parts of just real regular day life in society. And to say that that wasn't the case with the entirety of the series, I don't understand why this could be real but then the rest couldn't. Because when they were spending this time together in Los Angeles, the time they spent together in Los Angeles was so much more realistic, and it was just so much more authentic and so much real, as opposed to all the nonsense that was going on in the island. And when they were on the island, right, there was immortal people, there were all these spiritual obstacles to overcome, so much nonsense, all this time traveling bogus, like um yeah. So that, I just threw that out there. And then the church, I didn't even mention the church yet. So when they do land in Los Angeles, eventually, after the concert, of course, they all, start to remember everything. And then I guess they convinced Jack or something, or no, this is the church where Christian Shepherd was going to have his funeral. And so Jack is here in the church, I think, preparing basically for Christian's funeral. And, you know, I think it's honestly one of the most touching scenes in all of TV history. The conversation they have when Jack, I mean, I'm just shivering right now. I mean, it's just such an emotional scene when Jack opens up the coffin to his father and it's empty, and he's like upset. And then he turns around and, his dad is standing right there in front of him. And he's like, "How are you here, Dad?" And the dad, Christian's just like, "How are you here?" And then Jack like starts crying, and then he realizes that he died too. Um, and 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 Christian says um, that the most important time you spend in your life was the time you spent with these people. And that's a piece of evidence that actually proves that I'm wrong. Is when I have it written down. I'm actually going to read the quote. So the quote word for word is, yeah, the most important part of your life was the time you spent with these people. And then the second quote he says that disproves my theory was, Christian Shepherd actually does at one point say, "Everything that's ever happened to you is real." Christian says that to Jack. But I'm actually going to disprove that quote that I just said, because surely not, because what does Christian Shepherd mean that everything that's ever happened to you is real? Because mind you, they just spent a week in Los Angeles doing, regular society stuff, living their normal lives. But apparently that wasn't real, because remember, they were in Los Angeles, and then they went to the church, and then they found out that they were dead. And so certainly Christian Shepherd is not being 100% true, because truthfully, here's what I actually think. So I think the writers actually intended for the meaning of this show. I think the writers intended for them to be dead the entire time, right? I think the writers clearly had that planned out, because, you see so many themes of that. However, I think at the last minute, like the TV producers or some third party companies pressured the writers out of not doing that ending because they were probably worried that if the fans heard like, oh, well, we've been watching this show for years and now you're telling us that they were dead the whole time and everything was fake. The third party companies might have thought that perhaps that would have been too risky to do. And so they pressured the writers into making it so that just this Los Angeles timeline was, them being dead, and that was the afterlife, but then the island was real and that everything else was real. I think that's what um, happened. Um, and one one other thing of evidence, I want to go a little bit backwards here to the church, a little bit backwards. Christian Shepherd explained to Jack. He said that, and the conversation was going like Jack asked like, how are they all here now? Like how did they how were they all here at the church now? He was referring to like, Kate and Hurley, and Christian Shepherd said, well, there is no here now. And Christian said, everyone dies someday, kiddo. And he was basically implying that the afterlife here at the church is like time traveling. It's implied that like there is no time in the afterlife, that when they were in this church, like the concept of time just wasn't there, because Kate, of course, hadn't died yet, according to the writers, and according to the writers like Sawyer and Kate and Claire, they didn't die because remember, they boarded the Ajira flight that ascended away from the island. And I know, going on really long here and I have to touch up on that, but the Ajira flight actually took off and left the island. I'm going to go back to that in a minute and explain what I think about that. But basically Christian Shepherd says there is no here now, the afterlife, there is no time, but that's not true, because that can't be true, because when Christian Shepherd died, and it's factual, right, that Christian Shepherd was dead from the very beginning of the series. So what was it like from Christian Shepherd's perspective then? Because Christian Shepherd died at the very beginning, and then according to that, Jack, spent all these years on the island. So was Christian Shepherd waiting here at this church? Was Christian Shepherd waiting for like a few years for Jack to come to the church so Christian could explain everything? And it doesn't seem like that way, though, based on what Christian's saying. It's almost implying that no, they were not waiting, that Christian Shepherd was not waiting that long, and that it's almost like as soon as Christian Shepherd died, he was immediately in this church, and then immediately he saw Jack, because there was no time, and Kate didn't die yet, and Kate was in here too. And if that's the case, right, if Christian Shepherd didn't wait at all, if all of this happened like immediately, if this was all just something that just happened without the concept of time, then how does Christian Shepherd know about what happened on the island? How does Christian Shepherd know what happened to Jack, and how does Christian Shepherd know anything about the island if he was dead the whole time, and that he immediately was just here in the church, and that there was no time, and that there was no here now? It's bogus. This is not how if the afterlife existed, this is just not how it would work. And it just makes no sense. It just seems like a cheap ending. It just seems like the dialogue at the end was just rushed to put it in as like a last ditch effort to make it so their lives on the island were actually real and not the afterlife. But final point on the church here. Final point on the church here. If Christian Shepherd was dead all that time, right? Christian Shepherd has been dead before the series even started. Like as the series started, like Christian Shepherd was already dead. So how does this dead guy suddenly have all the answers to everything? How does Christian Shepherd have any credibility on what happened on the island? How does he have any credibility on what they went through or what was going on, because he was dead the whole time, right? So I just want to let that final piece of information sit in it, that if Christian was dead the whole time, how the hell does he know? This whole church thing is just so confusing, and it's clearly heaven, right? Because, finally they get to it, everything goes white, and they all get to move on together, and it really is truly a beautiful ending, but they executed it, and that's the thing, they just executed this in just such a stupid, I'm just going to cross it out, because they executed it so poorly. They just, what could have been like such a beautiful, simple ending, it could have been like the most beautiful ending and simple thing, and everyone would have been happy, and it could have just made sense, but they just decided to butcher it and do it in this like weird, stupid, complicated manner that, really no one can really understand. And, this is just not how the afterlife would work. This is just silly, right? Like if you have a friend, right, that like dies and they go to the afterlife, and then a few years later you die, like that friend that was waiting in the afterlife, of course they waited. Like there's still time. Like it's not just this, there's not just like this magical component where as soon as, one friend in the group dies, you're all now suddenly in this reality where you're all in the heaven together. Like, no, that's just not how it works. Like people die at their own times. Um, and so now I know this video's probably gone on, like reaching the hour long mark, maybe over an hour, but the Ajira flight, that ascends, I have to bring this up because this is kind of a piece of evidence that proves against me. So Kate, Miles, Sawyer, Claire, Frank Lapidus, like the pilot, and I think even Richard as well. I think Richard also gets on the Ajira plane that crash landed on Hydra Island, and they miraculously they get the plane to take off, and so Kate, Sawyer, and whoever made it on that Ajira flight, they actually take off and they actually ascend off of the island in a plane, in the Ajira plane, and Jack even sees it at the very end as Jack is like finally closing his eyes from like the stab wound or whatever. He sees the Ajira flight crew taking off, and what I think this means is I think, yes, they were still dead in that Ajira flight taking off. When Kate and Sawyer and Claire and everyone, when they finally made it off the island successfully, taking off in the plane, I think what that represented was that was still in the afterlife, but they had succeeded. They had finally overcome their challenge of escaping hell. They, worked together, they figured it out, and they ascended out of hell, and they were able to ascend out of hell and finally escape the island that was their hell. They were finally able to escape and ascend upwards. And presumably, I mean, I guess then that led them to, I guess the next thing that would have happened for them was then the City of Angels timeline happened for them. But basically, that is how I see it. Um, if you look at it in this manner, it makes sense because the writers do such a confusing job of explaining the series, and throughout the entire show, and I even have a list of like 20 nitpicks that hint towards them being in the afterlife, but they were just too small to include, and I might include that in another video. But basically everything in the entire show, I'm going to switch colors, everything in the entire show just hinted off at them being in the afterlife. And nothing in the show, like there was hardly anything that ever made sense in the show, and the only real solid evidence that we get was some dude named Christian Shepherd that was dead the entire time, and Christian Shepherd just says like a few lines of dialogue, and that's like the only solid evidence that it was real life. And but when it just clearly wasn't, clearly this whole 815 crash, clearly everything that happened to them, the smoke monsters, everything, it was all just um, part of the afterlife. It was all just the afterlife. That's really the only explanation for it. And thank you so much for watching the entire video. I really wanted to get this off my chest because this is one of my favorite television shows. It's, I think, in my opinion, it is the best television show in all of history. And it was keeping me up at night thinking about all these things that happened, and just telling myself over and over again that surely it had to be in their afterlife. But anyway, those are the top reasons why I think that everything that happened to them, I think they were dead the whole time. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a dislike because I wasted like an entire hour of your time. So go ahead, hit that dislike button. Don't even bother subscribing. I'm probably never gonna make another video, but well, I will. But you know, don't subscribe, right? Cheers. Yeah.